What's up, everyone? We are back now that MSI is really started underway, and we are here with a VOD review of the very first game of G2 versus SKT. So, we're going to start with Champion Select this time and take a look at how this game started off. So, first bans from G2, we have two support bans and a jungle ban. Specifically, we have Tom Kench and Galio as the support bans, two supports who are far and away the best at playing 1-3-1 because of the global ultimates that both champions have, as well as two supports that play a generally more defensive lane. However, I don't think that latter part is necessarily relevant. I think the main reason that G2 banned these two champions is that because they are trying to move into a 1-3-1 style of gameplay in this particular game. The J4 ban accompanying that is interesting. I'm kind of expecting to see J4 be more and more of a blue side ban because he's very, very popular as a first rotation jungler for specifically red side. He provides a lot of tankiness without losing out on much early game power and is one of the only junglers that can really engage a team fight. So as such, he is really, really safe and fits into a lot of different team compositions. So taking him off the table from the red side means that red side is forced to kind of give up a little bit more information with this first rotation because of how versatile Jarvan is. By selecting a Jarvan first rotation red side, you don't have to give away much information about your team composition. However, being that this is against SKT, I would almost expect actually a Lee Sin ban instead, because Lee Sin is kind of an El Clasico Clid pick. He's very, very well known for playing that champion. And you could argue that Lee Sin in the hands of Clid is actually a stronger form of engage than a Jarvan might be. Either way, J4 pick is fine. I would consider the J4 ban to be relatively standard. I don't think it's unbeatable, and I think there are quite a few champions that are more powerful than J4 is and might be worth banning more. Sylas is an example. But all in all, it's a perfectly fine ban if you want to force the enemy team to put their engage onto other members, and if you want to force the enemy team to give away a little bit more information about their team composition in the first rotation. SKT, with kind of classic red side ban in the Sona, you have to ban either Sona or Taric. Otherwise, you are probably going to just lose the game to that duo in the bottom lane. We see a Karthus ban, which is interesting. This is really a target ban against G2 specifically because a lot of teams don't really play the Karthus. It is very, very strong, especially in Korea. It's considered much stronger in Korea than it has really shown up to be in any other region except probably Europe. And it's well known that G2 plays the Karthus. It is known, I believe, to SKT that Karthus is a strong pick and something they probably just don't want to deal with. So they take the Karthus off the table. This does mean that some of the higher priority first pick champions are going to be available. It does mean that something like the Ryze or the Sylas or the Rek'Sai are going to end up on the table because SKT is opting to ban a champion like Rek'Sai, which is not one of those powerful first pick champions. It is more of a target ban towards specifically G2. The final SKT ban is going to be the Rek'Sai. This is really, it's a very strong champion. It is not necessarily first pickable. It's very strong specifically into Jarvan because it can bully him very effectively early, and Jarvan's already off the table. We know Jankos does like to play very aggressively, but tends not to want to give up the ability to make late game plays. He likes playing champions like the Jarvan or the Lee Sin that can catch people out very effectively, and Rek'Sai, as she scales later into the game, isn't necessarily good at that. So by taking away the Jarvan or the Rek'Sai, you're basically saying, okay, G2, we know what we want to pick jungle. We want to go for the Lee Sin, and we don't want you on a champion who will dominate Lee Sin early. And that's perfectly fine. That's kind of, you expect SKT to go for the Lee Sin. It's something they've kind of proven time and time again they're very strong on and they're very comfortable with. So SKT really is not necessarily trying to ban the classic red side ban champions. They're trying to shut down these very specific things that SKT don't want to be playing against. They want to be playing with Lee Sin, which means they don't want someone who is stronger than Lee Sin in the early game in the enemy jungle. So gotta ban Rek'Sai. We know we want to play a slower game. We want to play a little bit more towards scaling, so we don't want to be so incredibly outclassed in the late game in the jungle, so we ban Karthus. And then the Sona ban is required, pretty much. So first picks come in. We see the Rise, first pick for G2. This is a really solid first pick. It's a flex pick, really, really strong in both mid and top. It is also something that Faker has shown to play a lot, and it is really strong to take it away from SKT, and it plays directly into that 1-3-1 style of play that we were kind of expecting out of G2 based on the earlier 2 support bans that they made. So looking at this game just from the bans and even that Rise pick, we already know, okay, G2 wants to 1-3-1. How does SKT try and counter that? Pick lanes that don't actually lose the 1v1, and pick a bottom lane that can contest in that 3v3 in the middle lane, and or pick some hard engage. They've already taken some of the more powerful cross-map engage tools away, but there are still aggressive engage champions that are available. Something like Ornn might do a little poorly in the top lane, but allows you to make those aggressive engages. Something like a Sejuani in the jungle. Yes, it does fall further behind than a Jarvan would early, but it still can make those powerful aggressive engages that help you shut down a 1-3-1, which is clearly what G2 is trying to do. SKT opts instead for the Sylas, very powerful, very strong laning champion that also scales well. So if you're looking for something that can kind of split push and will probably not lose lane to pretty much anything, Sylas is really the champion that you're going to be looking for. It's a really solid pick. It pretty much should never get past first rotation, and we see here, it doesn't get past first rotation. Really, really standard from SKT. This is something like Sylas here, really what you expect to see. You expect Sylas to be picked early. They follow up with the Lee Sin. They are one of the only teams that pick Lee Sin, and they picked it early, which is also interesting to me. I suppose you could argue that G2 probably already knew SKT was going to pick Lee Sin, so by them picking it here, it doesn't give away that much information. However, right now we've already seen that the support pools have been pretty significantly pinched. We see 2 of the main supports already banned. So there is, I believe, a really strong argument for SKT to try and go for a more engage heavy jungler. Lee Sin can engage with something like 20 people, or to go for support AD carry here, because jungle pool, yes, there's already been 3 jungle bans and only also 3 support bans, I guess, but Sona isn't really a support ban. But you aren't really needing to pressure in jungle as much. Like, yes, having a more powerful jungler to help get your solo lanes ahead so that you don't fall behind in the 1-3-1 would be valuable, but the more effective way for SKT to try and take control of the game as opposed to playing defensively and trying to shut down what G2 is doing would be to try and have an advantage in the bottom lane. So going for something like a Lucian Braum here, or a more aggressive support by locking your support early and leaving up jungle as something to be maybe revealed later, there's an argument for that. I would say that picking the Lee Sin is standard for SKT. Everybody already knows they want to play it, and G2 has kind of already said, okay, yeah, go ahead, pick Lee Sin. We don't really care. So it's fine picking it up here. It doesn't give away much information. It does mean that supports or AD carries are liable to be pinched depending on what you pick in the second rotation, but it's a perfectly fine pick, and it is SKT picking comfort, really. So far, SKT has picked 2 comfort champions. Okay, next rotation, we have Xayah Rakan coming in for G2. This is interesting to me. It is... I have a hard time figuring out why they would go for Xayah Rakan when Lucian Braum is available. You are looking to have advantages in your lanes, right? You already have this Ryze Sylas matchup, which is an advantageous matchup for the Ryze, ultimately. So by getting advantages in mid or top lane with wherever this Ryze ends up, And in bottom lane, by picking something like a Lucian Braum, which will have an advantage, or even a Kalista Braum or a Kalista Alistar, or something more aggressive in the bottom lane, you do start to get too much pressure for SKT to deal with in the early game. I think the main argument for Xayah Rakan specifically is that it does engage. Yes, a Kalista plus anything does also engage very well. However, Xayah Rakan's engage, specifically Rakan, is much stronger into specifically Sylas. Because the ultimates that Sylas can get from a Xayah Rakan are much weaker than, say, stealing a Kalista ultimate, which is very strong. So getting, or say a Braum ultimate, which is of probably similar strength to the Rakan ultimate. So there is that kind of argument, and you could also say that G2 wants to have some amount of skill, and they don't want to go all in on winning the early game. However, I don't think that is necessarily a great idea. You know SKT is going to be incredibly strong in the game. That's what they like to do. So trying to pick a more kind of a hedgy bottom lane duo as opposed to just going, we're going to win early, let's commit to that, I think isn't necessarily the wisest choice. The other major downside of picking something like Xayah Rakan over Lucian Braum here is that it is another engage ultimate. The Braum ultimate is more defensive, which, yes, you do want some amount of engage on your team. You don't necessarily have that, but you are the 1-3-1. You are not necessarily trying to engage fights. They're the ones trying to engage fights, and every engage ultimate you pick up is another form of engage that you're giving to them because they have a Sylas. So picking up a Rakan and giving the Sylas another engage ability in the Rakan ultimate is not necessarily ideal. Fortunately, the Rakan ultimate is not in of itself a way to get into a fight and actually start the fight. So if G2 can avoid the Sylas chain or flash away or stop Khan from actually getting into melee range to begin with, then even if he takes the quickness, he is not going to actually be able to start a fight. So SKT does choose to follow up with the Ezreal. This is another comfort pick for SKT. This is a defensive bottom lane, which is interesting because you already know that it's a Xayah Rakan, a bottom lane that absolutely can be beat if you take a high CC, high stat bottom lane, which, hint, hint, there's a Nautilus down there, but we'll get to that later. So I don't think Ezreal is really the ideal pick here. When you lock in an Ezreal, you're basically announcing to the world that, okay, everyone ignore bottom lane, we're going to focus everything on the top side of the map. Which G2 is happy to do because they've already have this Ryze, very powerful laner, especially into melee matchups, which you see very commonly in the top lane. And that's what G2 kind of wants to be doing anyway. G2 wants the 1-3-1, so G2 wants to be devoting their resources to the top side of the map to get their solo lanes ahead. So picking an Ezreal here, I think, is to some extent playing into what G2 wants to be doing. Yes, Ezreal is a solid 1-3-1 champion, but he's not going to start off the team fight, so he's not going to break the 1-3-1 in any way. He's not going to make your 1-3-1 better. You still lose the 1-3-1 against... or probably going to lose it. We don't know the other solo laner for G2 or any of that, but we know G2 wants the 1-3-1. We know you're probably going to fall behind in that 1-3-1. Picking an Ezreal, which is a 1-3-1 champion, and it is okay sitting in the mid lane in that 1-3-1, isn't necessarily going to change that. I would have preferred, out of SKT, something that can compete in the 1-3-1, or something that can help get those team fights started, like something like an Ashe, which has that engage potential, or a Kalista, which can win the bottom lane, which pulls pressure away from your solo lanes, and Kalista can engage very effectively, something that Ezreal cannot do. And that is something that is necessary to shut down a 1-3-1, which is what G2 has kind of already announced they're trying to do. Either way, the Ezreal comes through, SKT opt in for comfort, and we're going to see the next round of bans. We see Morgana and Aurelia come through for SKT, which is very, very interesting. We already have support and mid/top on the side of G2. So seeing a Morgana ban makes very little sense to me. The champion is not strong in 1-3-1. The champion is a 4-1 or a 5v5 champion, right? Yes, Morgana is capable of existing in a split push, but it's not really where you want to be, and it is incredibly beatable. On top of that, you're basically picking this, assuming it's going to be Morgana mid and Ryze top, which you would then be able to counterpick with whatever you choose. You could pick a Cassiopeia and suddenly have this vastly superior 5v5, or you could pick a number of champions that can outshove a Morgana and can significantly punish a Morgana. So the Morgana ban is a bit weird, and I think it does really display that SKT is intending on picking the Nautilus or a Thresh or some other CC heavy support that gets shut down by a Morgana existing on the enemy team, right? If you are on SKT in this position and you know that you want to pick Nautilus or you want to pick, say, a Thresh, and that puts you into a position where the way you win the game is by getting these picks, getting these engages with your hard CC pick potential, with your Nautilus hooks and your Thresh hooks and all of that, which means that if there is a Morgana on the other team to shut that down with the Black Shield, you start having a much more difficult time. So there is this reasoning for the Morgana ban. It is directly telling G2 what it is that SKT wants to be doing, but this is one of the later bans, so it doesn't really give away that much information, and G2 probably doesn't mind. So Aurelia ban as well is very reasonable. It's very strong into the Sylas, and G2 technically haven't shown their top laner. So Aurelia would do basically the same thing as Jace, except scale a little bit better, in that you pick it, put it in the top lane, and you win the lane, and you get to split push, and you get to 1-3-1. So SKT is basically in a position where they have to ban probably either Aurelia or Jace. Those are two of the main champions that you are going to be looking to pick into a Sylas. The other one would be this Akali, which G2 chose to ban. So SKT says, no Aurelia. We're fine going into the Jace matchup. It is a matchup that Sylas is capable of going even in. So we're going to let you pick Jace and just try and scale and just try and engage team fights and shut down the 1-3-1 as much as we can. And then they commit to that by picking a hard engage support, which is exactly what they should be doing. It was hinted at by the Morgana ban, and it's a really solid pick coming out of the side of SKT. Meanwhile, on G2's side, we have a Akali ban, which is interesting because you've already seen the Sylas, and you haven't locked your top lane. And Akali is strong at a Sylas, but then again, so is Ryze. So banning Akali would imply that, again, you want to 1-3-1, you're going to be picking probably a squishier top laner, even if it is the Ryze or it is some other top laner that you lock in. And it is saying that we want to be able to win this 1v1 with our squishier top laner throughout the whole match. So taking Akali off the table is reasonable. The champion is incredibly strong, and not wanting to deal with it and the Akali's ability to engage and get on top of you from very long distances is absolutely reasonable. The other ban is the Braum, which makes a lot less sense to me. It is not particularly strong into Rakan. It's a fine matchup, but Rakan specifically is generally weaker to the heavy CC, heavy stat focused supports. Champions like Nautilus, champions like Thresh. So taking the Braum off the table is a strange decision on that end. I think it is both weaker into the G2 bottom lane than something like Nautilus or Thresh, and it is weaker into the G2 team comp than something like Nautilus and Thresh. SKT kind of does really need hard engage support. They have AD carry you cannot really engage. A jungler who can kind of engage if he gets a really, really lucky kick, but cannot consistently engage, and you have a solo laner who cannot engage. So SKT is really going to be looking for engaged champions, and Braum isn't really an engaged champion. So banning away the Braum here, I don't think is really the ideal decision. I think banning away the Nautilus or the Thresh would have been a better choice on the side of SKT, on the side of G2. They do opt for the Braum though, and then after the Nautilus has been revealed, they go with Jace and Elise. So Jace is almost expected here. I would have preferred SKT to ban Jace instead of Morgana, but that's fine. And Jace is one of the champions that does win lane against Sylas, not necessarily in a landslide, but it is a favorable matchup. And it plays directly into the G2 1-3-1 plan. We know that's the plan. This is them committing to it, saying, okay, we have winning solo lanes, let's go. The Elise as well, strong in a Sylas, doesn't have a great ultimate for him to steal. And it is a champion that goes toe-to-toe aggressively with Lee Sin in the early game. That wins many of those early game exchanges. So this is arguably G2's second choice. You could absolutely argue that they wanted the Rek'Sai, they wanted to have an early jungle advantage over SKT, but the Rek'Sai is off the table, so, and Lee Sin is a strong early game champion, so it is going to be Elise, who does have some amount of advantage over Lee Sin in the very, very early game, and does still provide some amount of utility with the Cocoon as the game goes on. SKT finishes out their comp with the Azir, mid lane champion that is capable of engaging situationally, but does still provide that engage that you really want to shut down a 1-3-1. Has solid wave clear, again, strong into a 1-3-1, and basically says that we win 5v5 fights in the later game no matter what, pretty much. Having a Jace into an Azir on the map, having a Lee Sin into an Elise anywhere on the map, basically means that SKT is going to be favored in these 5v5 fights. And a lot of the game is going to come down to, are they going to be able to start these 5v5 fights without you wasting too many of their tools on engaging? So we see, can Azir kick off a team fight without dying because he had to dash in to do so? Can Lee Sin do the same? Can Nautilus kick off a team fight if that means wasting all of his CC and damage on someone like Wonder, who's going to be decently tanky? That's going to be what a lot of this game comes down to, because Azir cannot really exist inside of a side lane. So those are the teams. This game is largely going to come down to early pressure in the side lanes, primarily top lane, because this is going to be a game where the 1-3-1 is really, really important. And how well do these teams actually play out the 1-3-1? So, game is getting started. We see a few early wards on both teams. So it would seem that the G2 jungle start has been spotted, and G2 is aware of this, I believe. They're pinging it out, so yes, they are aware of this. But ultimately, nothing of particular interest as the game is starting to get going. We see press the attack, or lethal tempo Azir, as opposed to the Comet. Faker picking for later game team fighting, which is kind of what we expected. We expected SKT to really focus on having this much more powerful late game team fight, as opposed to trying to win lane, because you're not really going to win top lane. You've already picked a more defensive bottom lane. So extra pressure mid lane isn't really going to accomplish much. Yes, stopping the Ryze from teleporting away when you yourself do not have the teleport is relevant, but lethal tempo compared to Comet, neither are really going to be that important for actually just shoving out the lane or pressuring the lane. You're just losing ability to trade and get advantages. And Azir into Ryze already has some advantages for the Azir, so it is perfectly understandable to want to select more for a later game setup. So the lane plays out. We're seeing early push in the bottom lane for SKT. This is not necessarily what you want if you're G2. Xayah should be able to push the wave more effectively than an Ezreal can. However, the Relic Shield does really help the bottom lane for SKT get that early shove, which means they are going to get a little bit of a CS advantage, and we are going to see a tiny amount of chunk onto that turret, and what could have been a nice little bit of vision in the bottom side river or the bottom side tri-brush for SKT, but they choose not to go for that. They do get into the Fog of War, threatening that, so G2 might assume bot lane is warded, but it does not really matter because, as expected, everyone's going top lane. So everybody shows up into the top lane. This is really, really early for Ryze to be leaving lane. We've seen he shoved in the lane. Azir, Faker did kind of let him. Azir should be able to counter shove effectively. And as a result, Faker is going to be late onto this play. And there's going to be, for some amount of time, a 3v2 situation in the top lane. Faker decides not to follow up because he does have this teleport disadvantage, so he is kind of disadvantaged in these roams. And elects instead to shove in the mid wave. This is Faker playing for himself and not for his team. He's saying, okay, I'm going to get a lead, but you're going to fall behind so that I can get this lead in the mid lane. In of itself, this is fine. Faker getting an advantage. It's an acceptable trade of mid lane CS for top lane pressure. However, it is top lane pressure plus jungle advantage because you're going to get to catch Clid out in his jungle and force him to participate in this skirmish and ward up Clid's jungle, which does somewhat favor G2. However, Clid and the rest of SKT are well aware that this is going on. The top lane has been shoving this entire time, so you see there is a significant wave, which does imply that Wunder is intending on diving sometime soon. On top of that, obviously mid lane's MIA. It is an Elise Jace, really, really powerful early dive. So this is a very telegraphed play, which SKT respond to mediocre, not really well. Faker, we just saw, still has a bunch of minions alive in the mid wave, even though Caps is all the way up here. So SKT has really been kind of slow responding to this play, even though it was so incredibly telegraphed. Yes, Clid is in the right place. Whether or not it's on purpose is another question, because we know they started at the same place in jungle and just took almost the exact same jungle clear. But now Khan is left completely high and dry because Clid has been forced away. We are still in this 3v2 situation. There is still a significant minion wave in the top side, and Faker still hasn't actually shoved the mid wave. So Clid is now going to recall. Caps is going to recall. Jankos is going to recall. Ultimately, nothing will happen in this top lane dive other than some amount of CS gained on the side of Wunder, some amount of CS lost on the side of Caps. However, Clid is now disadvantaged in the jungle. Oh, Clid remains. And nothing happens. Let's back up when we talk about this. But Clid is now disadvantaged in the jungle. He is a bit behind. There is now G2 aggressive vision in the SKT jungle. And SKT haven't gotten anything in return. So Clid decides he's going to be cheeky, doesn't actually recall here, and just kind of stays back to try and make this play happen onto Wunder. However, Khan is going to miss the stun and the dash, and he'll just walk away fine. Clid is now significantly far behind. And Jankos is, to some extent, going to allow Clid the opportunity to catch up by pathing up top again instead of going to clear his actually living jungle camps. However, Clid having now spent a bunch of time topside and gotten nothing for it, whilst Jankos basically has cleared 2 more camps than he did. Jankos is up the Scuttle Crab and the Wolves, effectively. So now, even if Clid now takes a recall and goes and keeps clearing, while Jankos is wandering topside where there is nothing to clear, all Clid can do is catch up, whilst Jankos is going to apply yet more pressure into the topside and get Wunder yet further ahead, because Sylas is still to some extent vulnerable to ganks. There is still a lot of damage on Elise Jace. So going for this top lane gank on the side of Lee Sin was very risky. And Clid is going to continue to fall behind because of it, and Khan is now going to also fall behind because of it, which is very poor, and it is not how you want this game to be playing out if you are SKT. As I've mentioned in Champions Select, G2 needs to 1v1. That is their plan. And the way to effectively 1-3-1 is by getting your side lanes ahead. So because this Jace has been allowed to get ahead, he has this wonderful freeze. He has Jankos right there to shut down Khan yet further. This Jace is going to be incredibly strong in this 1-3-1 inside of the side lane. And it will be very difficult for SKT to do much about it, unless Klid commits yet more time and resources to the top lane. But he's already fallen behind, and if he commits more time and resources to the top lane, Jankos will be free to get the rest of the map ahead. Or Jankos can just also stay top lane and continue to shut Klid down and shut Klid out of the game. So Khan gets a nice little favorable trade here. Sylas is still a very strong laning champion, and if you do misstep against him, you will get punished and you will get out-traded. However, Khan has taken a recall and burned the teleport. Wunder still has not, so Wunder is perfectly okay taking trades here because Wunder will TP back and suddenly be full health again, and Khan will still have lost however much HP he lost in that trade. So, the game continues. Ultimately, G2 are a bit ahead. I know the gold lead would say they are behind because there is a marginal CS lead in the mid lane and because there is kleptomancy on the side of Teddy. But I would argue that G2 are actually ahead because while there is a bit of a lead on the other members of SKT, there is on G2 a lead where it matters. Jace being ahead is the most important. Because the Rise doesn't need to be ahead. The Rise is going to be better in a 1v1 against the Azir anyway, right? The Rise can be down 30 CS going into the late game. If you're in a 1-3-1, if you have pressure in the 1v1, if you have some amount of advantage in the 3v3, and you're able to get that 1-3-1 off, it doesn't matter if Rise is behind. He's still going to be a better solo laner than an Azir will in the late game. In a 1-3-1 scenario, obviously in a 5v5, Azir is going to be significantly stronger. So we're seeing, back to top lane, Jankos with the Elise stronger early gets to keep shutting out Lee Sin. And Lee Sin is priced into being top lane because of the advantages that Wunder has picked up. So Wunder is now in such a good spot, and he is so strong, and Khan is so far behind him as of this point, that Klid is priced into being top lane, or it's going to fall over, and they will lose the game through top end of itself. Which means all that Jankos has to do is just show up top lane and say, hello, Klid, get away from me. I'm stronger than you. I'm taking this camp. And Klid can no longer do anything. Klid is now in a very, very bad situation. And SKT largely just needs to delay the game as much as they can. We're going to see Flash and Ignite burned on the side of Mata. Let's back up a little bit so we can get a better look at this play. He goes into Snare Perks, allows Teddy to get a Kleptomancy proc off. That's kind of basic and kind of, decent, but instant follow-up on the side of Mickey goes for the knockup and Mata flashes out. Had he not flashed out, that play would possibly have resulted in Mata dying. I believe the hook has got to be on cooldown because he could have hooked out of that. He could have just hooked the wall and gotten out of that clean. Chooses to flash instead, which would imply to me that the hook is on cooldown. But I'm not sure. So, flash ignite burned. G2 gets more of that pressure. Hook is back up. Okay, this is really poor. So, they just burned ignite. Waiting for abilities to come back up. By now, hook is back up, which was apparently down. But Rakan's abilities are also liable to be back up. We just saw Mickey leveled up, so that there's a level advantage of him over Mata. And now Mata is going to make an engage onto Perks. Makes some amount of sense. Traditionally, you want to engage onto the AD carry rather than the enemy support. However, Perks is at almost full health. Mickey is at half health. Mata is also at half health. So right now, what is effectively going to be happening is that Mata from half health is going to dive in onto the full health member of Perks, using all of his CC and damage onto Perks, which means that Teddy is then left in a situation where he has to either hit Mickey and split up his 2v2's damage and lose the fight because the support was hitting one player and the AD carry was hitting the other player, or try and hit Perks when there's a minion wave in the way, which makes things difficult for Ezreal. And Perks is at full health while Mata's at half health, which means that we have 2 people hitting a full health member and 2 people hitting a half health member. Mata's going to die well before Perks does. You add on to that the fact that you have that G2 has Ignite and SKT doesn't. I have a really hard time justifying this engage. Yes, there is Faker roaming down and towards the bottom lane. G2 is aware of this, so if SKT wants to try and make a bot lane play, they have to go for it now and hope that Faker gets here in time. However, the wave in the lane is not remotely in a situation where they can actually go for this play, and they are going to be punished for it. Mata is going to make this engage, and he is going to just die well before Faker can arrive, and they walk right out. Poorly thought out, poorly played attempt at a play by SKT. Caps, I believe, could have shoved this lane out a little bit more. He has some extent of knowledge of the top side of the map. He knows that Lee Sin is probably not bottom side, or that play would have probably gone a little bit differently. So he could possibly have shoved out that wave a little bit more before Faker could return. Either way, perfectly fine. Right here, Perks takes a trade, which on the face of it is really, really bad, but is actually really intelligent if you consider the way the game is going to play out from here. So, for a little bit of reference, Perks is just coming off of a recall, right? He is very close to finishing his Essence Reaver, but is not quite there. Teddy, however, has not yet recalled. So, going into this, you would think Perks would have a bit of a damage advantage. However, he's about to tank a bunch of minion aggro, so he's not actually going to have that much of a damage advantage. It isn't necessarily going to be a favorable trade. On top of that, though, you know that Teddy is low mana and hasn't recalled in a while. So Teddy wants to recall soon. Perks just did recall, so doesn't want to recall until he has enough money for Essence Reaver, right? So you're going to go for this trade, and looking at the minion wave, it already is likely to be a losing trade for Perks. You're going to go for this trade, and then Teddy is going to recall because he wants to recall soon anyway, and then you are either going to have to recall yourself and not get very much because you just did recall, or stay in lane while low health and allow them to recall and get pressure onto you when they shouldn't have that pressure, especially considering you just got an early kill. So on the face of it, it looked like a very poor trade. However, because of the advantage that SKT has in the bottom lane, because of how quickly Xayah specifically is able to shove out minions with the feathers, Perks is going to be able to take this trade and then shove in the wave, such that Teddy does not have much of an opportunity to recall here. Now, Teddy should recall and be willing to accept losing a few minions to the turret because you burned your teleport earlier and Perks had it for this past recall. But Teddy chooses not to, stays back to defend the turret. Bit of a top lane trade. We see, yes, Wonder is indeed very far ahead. Things are rough for Khan. He's been behind all game and will continue to be behind for the foreseeable future. And this is everything going to plan for the side of G2. This is getting that top lane ahead, which is what you picked this top jungle duo to do, and getting yourself into a position where you can start looking to get the 1-3-1 going and starting to win through that split push. So Teddy still has not left lane, no longer has the ability to because his teleport is on cooldown and he is so effectively shoved a turret. And things are going to be a little bit harder for SKT now. Teddy needs to recall. He's not going to be able to. That trade that Perks made earlier, yes, he has a health disadvantage because of this trade, but Teddy has no mana and is stuck in this lane that he can no longer leave. On top of that, Teddy is still a bit chunked from that trade. And now we're going to see the members of SKT kind of start to recall, but not really be able to finish it because G2 is going to be able to keep shoving out this turret and keep saying, yes, you cannot leave this lane or you'll lose a bunch of CS and a bunch of turret plates, even though I know you really want to leave this lane because you have no mana. This is an advantage that G2 got way back ago when Teddy first burned his teleport, and TP advantage was given over to Perks, and they're still able to play it and push Teddy to stay in this lane when he doesn't want to because he burned his teleport earlier. So trades continuing to happen in the bottom lane. Advantage still for G2 in the top lane. We're seeing Faker is a little bit ahead in this mid lane matchup, which is reasonable. Azir just straight up outranges Ryze and can effectively DPS through the minions, which Ryze cannot do, and Azir does shove minion waves more effectively than Ryze can. So seeing an Azir kind of up ahead of the Ryze, especially when Caps is more looking to roam around and impact the map, that rather than Faker, who is just trying to farm up, you do kind of expect to see the Azir getting a little bit ahead. Caps, though, could be performing a little bit better and absolutely could be contesting that CS a little bit more effectively. However, we're seeing the return of the 3-man top lane dive. Not going to pick up any kills here, but they are going to force Faker away from mid lane. They're going to recall their bottom lane and send their bottom lane mid. There is now the Essence Reaver, so Xayah on Perks' Xayah did get the recall that she wanted. And now, because Teddy was so low on mana and desperately needed to recall, Teddy had to recall after Perks did, right? Perks got to shove out the wave and then recall, and Teddy had to stay and clear the wave, and then Teddy could recall. Which means that Perk was around here by the time Teddy was starting to push his way back towards the bottom lane. SKT was unaware that the G2 bottom lane was looking to move towards mid lane, and because of that early trade that Perks made, pushing Teddy down to low mana to allow them to push up the bottom wave effectively and quickly and hold Teddy there and to force him to make a recall rather than being in a position to rotate, G2 was able to make this 3-man dive top, forcing the Azir to leave the mid lane and travel to the top lane, and then at the same time show their bottom lane mid lane to shove down this mid lane turret before Teddy realizes what's up and before Teddy can answer and come mid instead of going bot. Teddy's teleport still is not up, so he does not have that tool to travel to the mid lane and shut down this push. And this is an incredibly intelligent rotation on the side of G2. You can see that they planned it out when you saw Perks going for that early trade onto Teddy. And it is going to pay off for them tremendously. Because they were the first to this top lane, they were going to pick up a bunch of plates onto this top lane. And because SKT had to respond to this top lane play by sending Faker up, they're going to also lose a bunch of plates in the bottom lane. And Teddy is going to accomplish nothing in this time. He's traveling around mid and blue buff, and he's not shoving out the bot lane. So Teddy's not going to get any plates for this. There's going to be multiple turret plates, several hundred gold going over to the side of G2 for basically nothing because of how well they planned out this rotation. Really, really good stuff from G2. Really, really impressive. And this is the kind of planning, the kind of thinking ahead that you really hope to see out of some of the best teams in the world. I'm really happy to see this. So the rotation ends. Everyone kind of goes back to their lane. Yankees will pick up a Rift Herald. You expect Rift Herald to kind of go over for free when you have a top laner winning by as much as Wonder is. This is pretty natural for the matchup, for how you expect these team compositions to play out. And that is going to be first turret for G2 eventually, not quite yet. SKT does trade back onto the bottom side. Again, this is standard. When one team commits resources to the top side, especially when the other team is not able to contest, it makes perfect sense to instead allocate resources to the bottom side and try and trade back. So perfectly reasonable. A bit unlucky for SKT that it is an Ocean Drake because they were probably going to get the Drake no matter what. And the fact that it is not a very good Drake is not ideal for the side of SKT. But it is what it is. G2, however, is still very far ahead. and are continuing to push that advantage. We are also going to see as well that because this is a 1-3-1 team composition and they have two very effective solo laners, and not just two effective solo laners, but two solo laners who pair up very nicely against specifically the Sylas, that this Sylas, who has been forced to itemize armor because of the extent to which the Jace has been punishing him, because there is the lethality on the Jace, this Sylas is going to have a very difficult time dealing with the magic damage coming out of Elise and coming out of Ryze. And because Ryze is an effective solo laner, because Ryze can also split push very effectively, it's really easy for G2 to say, you know what, Khan, you're going to lane against Caps now, and you're going to have multiple armor items against the champion who doesn't deal any physical damage. And Khan can't deal with that. That's a lane that will not last long. That is a lane that will hemorrhage turrets unless SKT devotes resources to it. On the other side of the map, you are liable to have Wonder versus either Teddy or Faker, or Wonder just alone, which is another lane that will hemorrhage resources and hemorrhage turrets. So already, just because of the fact that Khan is so incredibly far behind of Wonder in this 1v1 and has had to build so single-mindedly towards trying to survive Wonder, and is even then unable to do so, SKT is already at a point where they really can no longer survive a 1-3-1. If a 1-3-1 commences, SKT will continue to lose turrets and continue to lose objectives and continue to lose vision and continue to lose pressure until they lose the game. Which means that SKT at this point is desperate for 5v5 fights. They need there to be 5v5s. They need to get picks. They need these clutch Lee Sin clicks and these Sin kicks and these clutch Shurima shuffles and these clutch Nautilus hooks and ults onto important members of G2 to get these picks, to get 5 versus 5 fights in which you can try and eke out some sort of advantage. Because if you don't, the 1-3-1 will happen and you will lose the game. So G2 sends a few people mid, or sends the entire squad mid to defend the Rift Herald, get the charge onto the mid wave. That's fairly standard. Getting down this mid lane turret would allow G2 to actually move into the SKT jungle because they have this side lane pressure, and getting down that mid lane turret is kind of the first step in getting this 1-3-1 really going. I do believe that at 15 minutes, we are actually already at a point in the game where you could rotate Wonder to the bot lane, Caps to the top lane, and your other two members into the mid. I think that would be favorable for G2. However, they are able to pick up the mid tower for free because they make a rotation and I don't necessarily want to call it a play onto Faker, but they send their powerful members into the mid lane, and they are so far ahead on the Jace and on the Elise that SKT cannot really contest it, and they do just lose their mid lane turret as well. So G2 doing a great job of maintaining control of the game, maintaining the snowball, really solid rotations coming out of them. Their macro game so far has been pretty immaculate. I do still believe they've kept Perks in the bottom lane for too long. It is not really necessary for them to still be there. And Jace would have an easier time against Sylas or whoever else they send down taking this bottom lane turret than he would have in any other lane. And he would have an easier time taking it than Perks and Mickey. Either way, G2 does opt for this continued kind of standard laning phase long past the point where they really need to. And Wonder is now finally going to make his way down. It looks like they're going to make a concerted push for this tower, which is kind of against G2's game plan, right? Sylas can teleport in, and yes, Faker can't necessarily get here in time, but making this rotation and going just 4-man bot here is, to some extent, opening yourself up to SKT getting the 5v5 fight, right? Faker arguably misread the map and misplayed by staying mid and continuing to farm, um, especially when Caps was visibly down in the river and, or at least inside of SKT, visibly not in mid lane. So if Faker had been in position to punish that play, and Khan had been willing to teleport onto this river ward, or this lane ward, and steal a Rakan ultimate, SKT absolutely could have made a play on, could have engaged a team fight, gotten a 4v4 or 5v5 team fight that they do desperately need, and could have gotten back in this game. So G2, by going for this kind of concerted bot lane push, it does open them up to SKT making a counterplay and coming back into this game. So I'm not sold on G2 making that rotation. However, it works out for them because SKT, I suppose of all the teams, is probably one of the worst at pulling the trigger and making these fights actually happen. So nothing happens. G2 gets some free turrets because SKT makes no response to this play. And then Caps is going to run warp into the top lane. I think this was a little bit of a mistake. Let's take another look at this play, but you see run warp coming in. He arrives, gets the snare there. You see it's not up for another several seconds. I don't think he needed to burn the snare that early. Let's take another look at this, but Sylas's ability to escape, he can dash away, but for the most part, he's already in range of all of Ryze's abilities, and he would have to flash out over this wall, or Ryze could just chase him down. This is a phase rush Ryze, right? So Ryze can just follow him down and basically put Khan in a position where he has to either flash and try and get to this blast cone, attempt to trade back, which you cannot really do. He's got a bunch of armor items against a Ryze, or steal the Ryze ultimate, which is how he ultimately escapes. But because Caps chose to root earlier, he does not have the root available to stop Khan from realm warping out. So Khan will escape from this for basically free. I don't think Caps necessarily had to burn the snare that early, and he could quite feasibly have managed to kill Khan there. It was still close, and there is absolutely the argument that had Khan had something else instead of this Kindle gem, that he would have died there. Khan, I mean, he's in a poor position there. He did get, obviously, yeah, he got caught out by Caps, did escape with his life, but still should not have been there, really. But he didn't have much of a choice, right? G2 was making an aggressive play onto the bottom side. Faker did not have the mid lane pressure that he needed to counter that. And so with the teleport, Khan's options were to try and hard shove this top lane turret, or teleport bot to try and make a play. And since Faker wasn't in position to make that bottom play, Khan had to just stay top and try and push down the turret, which meant he had to be shoved up, which meant he was to some extent forced to be out of position for the Ryze there. So G2 still has bot lane pressure. They picked up a lot of bot lane jungle vision with that early 4-man push. So they are going to pick up the Cloud Drake for free. That's expected. That's what happens when you have bot lane pressure and you have bot lane priority. And now G2 has advantages in every lane. Yes, Ryze is behind Azir. That's not relevant. Ryze is ahead of Sylas. Azir cannot answer Sylas in the 1v1. Because you have advantage on the map, you get to decide the lane assignments. You get to decide, okay, we want 1-3-1. We want you to have to put either your Azir or your Ezreal into a solo lane where they will get destroyed by a Jace. We want you to put Sylas in the solo lane with Ryze, where he will also get destroyed. There is no place on the map where SKT has a real advantage. Yes, again, there is some amount of gold, maybe, onto Azir. Not really much, considering there's now a huge turret lead on the side of G2, but you could consider there to be a little advantage on Azir because of the scaling and maybe whatever, but SKT does not have enough advantage, does not have enough pressure, does not have enough cross-map play ability to end a 1-3-1. The only thing SKT can try and do is to make a teleport play, or to somehow wrest vision control over their own jungle. Something that G2 can fairly easily shut down. So we are 19 minutes in, 5k gold lead, pretty much already at a point where SKT can no longer win the game. G2 need to make a series of mistakes that would allow SKT to get a advantaged person team fight, a 4v3 or a 5v3 or something like that. That would lead to significant advantages on the side of SKT. Not as in, it would need to be a strong team fight onto one of the solo laners while the other solo laner is recalling. Because if it's just a team fight, it's just a pick onto one of the solo laners, you're going to lose a turret in response, which isn't an advantage. SKT needs advantages at this point, and the options they have to obtain those advantages are incredibly limited. They need a 5v5 team fight, which they don't have a consistent way of starting. They need some amount of defensive vision inside of their jungle, which they have no consistent way of getting. So SKT already is looking to be pretty much out of this game, which is unfortunate, but that's how it goes. So we're seeing G2 is, to some extent, playing directly in SKT's hands here. This is one of the series of events that SKT kind of requires in order to get back into this game, is they need G2 to group as 5, right? If G2 is in a 1v1, there's nothing SKT can do, unless they can somehow get a 5v3 engage, but they would still lose objectives in response to that. So SKT basically needs G2 to group as 5, and G2 up in that top lane seemed happy to group as 5. I think that's a mistake. G2 does take a reset. It is a visible reset in that SKT is aware that they took this reset, which means SKT is able to regain vision in the topside jungle, is able to obtain some level of vision over the Baron pit. This is another mistake from G2. When you have this kind of advantage, your primary goal should be deny. Do not let SKT get anything, and that anything includes vision in the topside jungle. Control over the Baron is everything at this stage in the game. If G2 pick it up, they end the game. That's basically it. There's nothing SKT can do at that point. There's very little SKT can do at this point, but should G2 pick up the Baron, it's very, very easy to just 1-3-1, Baron buff minions in 3 lanes, shove down your base, win the game. The way that G2 does that, in a way that SKT cannot contest, is by maintaining the vision advantage they had in the topside jungle, maintaining the lack of SKT vision in the river, in the Baron pit. However, they took a visible reset, they took a 5-man reset as opposed to a split reset, and they give up that vision control that they had. Not the ideal way to play your advantage if you're on the side of G2. Anyway, game continues. Infernal Drake is coming up. G2 is still incredibly far ahead, so you would expect this to go over to G2 for free. There's still very little that SKT can do to contest vision through the strength of the members of G2, so this is going to fall. This is going to fall pretty effectively and pretty soon. And for free, SKT is going to try and trade back by kind of reasserting some of that jungle vision that they had, but they already had it. Right? G2 let them get it. They've decided, okay, you can have this jungle vision, we're going to take Drake. So SKT walking back up to the top side to replace wards that they had already placed isn't necessarily much of a trade back, but it's kind of all they can ask for. They can't really ask for anything. And then this fight happens. Okay, we're going to take a look at this one. So once again, G2 is grouping as 5. Which is, as we've mentioned, exactly what they don't want to do. It is exactly what SKT needs them to do in order to come back into this game. However, G2 did spot out multiple members of SKT in the top lane, in the top lane, which means this push is to some extent indefensible by SKT. There's not much that SKT can actually do to stop a concerted push, other than, Ezreal ult the wave and other some minions, and you have to back off. On the face of this, it's fine. Yes, you grouped as 5 when you don't really need to. Yes, this is kind of an unnecessary risk. However, you did still spot out SKT in a bad rotation, which means you did get to send people mid and chunk out the mid lane turret. So that's perfectly fine, perfectly acceptable. It isn't ideal. It isn't the best possible thing they could have been doing. They could have been in a 1-3-1 here, but it is a perfectly acceptable series of plays. At this point, once you know that SKT have rotated their other members mid lane, you're now in a 5v5. Now you send Jace top. Now you send Caps bot, or Jace bot and Caps top. It doesn't matter. You initiate the 1-3-1. You keep your 3 a little bit back so there isn't a threat of an engage onto those 3 members. And you initiate the 1-3-1. G2 instead chooses not to do this. Perkz decides that he needs to step forward and finish up this tower. And I'm not sure why he makes this decision, but he does. So now Perkz gets caught, is liable to die here, but does manage to escape by burning the ultimate and walking out, and Jace coming in to kind of pressure the backside of SKT, saying, hey, if you chase, I'm going to flank you. So SKT is forced to back off of Perkz a little bit. And now we have a split fight. So, you know how I said that SKT needs to fight 5v5 and that's how they win? SKT instead chooses to opt for a 2v3 fight and another 2v3 fight. That is not a 5v5 fight, is it? No, that is 2 separate skirmishes that are happening at once. And that is not how SKT is going to win this, right? Yes, you've got what is ultimately a pick onto Jace. That's really good. That's kind of what you need. At this point, what you can do is you can rotate Lee Sin up. You don't want to walk behind the feathers, so you kind of have to go around them, which is really awkward. And then you can leave Teddy right here threatening more poke onto the members of G2 to stop the other members of G2 from coming up this lane, and trying to contribute to the fight. At that point, you have 3 to 4 members inside this jungle area skirmishing onto the 2 members of G2, and you can get a pick or 2 out of that. That is how SKT can convert this pick onto Jace into an actual advantage. How they can maybe make this into a 5v5 fight, which is what SKT wants, as opposed to just taking multiple skirmishes. Instead, Clid continues forward. Teddy continues forward. Clid does walk right under the feathers, and surprise, he got rooted because he walked under his eye feathers. And Clid's gonna just die because of it. On top of that, Wonder is able to flash out. Caps is able to flash out. The pick in the jungle is now nullified because nobody on the side of SKT was really there to push it. Faker didn't get in time to Shurima shuffle somebody back. And then we're going to see Wonder decides that, this game has been too easy, and he wants to hand over a little bit of gold to SKT. So G2 is following up on this recon ult and pushing in onto Teddy, who has been locked down. His arcane shift is down, and he has flash, so he absolutely could have flashed away and not, been CC'd by the recon. But he is, I believe he also gets a cocoon here, and he gets changed CC'd and he gets popped. So the solo laners of G2, seeing this happening, know that they need to contribute to this fight, or it will just be an advantage fight for SKT. Caps makes the intelligent decision and walks out, and Wonder decides he's going to, at, 60%, 70% HP, walk right into 3 Azir soldiers. This is truly the highest level of play. And it's part of what I love about this game, because you have these great moments where G2, you can visibly see them planning out their next rotation several minutes before it actually happens, and then in the exact same game, you'll see G2 just completely inting by walking just right into 3 Azir soldiers and just dying for no reason. Truly beautiful. Okay, game continues. G2 makes the run warp into Baron play. Because they did kill Clid and Teddy in that exchange, they are advantaged because they have 1 more alive and SKT has no jungler. So, run warp to Baron pit, fairly easy Baron. And what did I say about Baron? Once G2 gets Baron, they can no longer lose. And that's basically true. And also for funsies, their minions are going to pick up the mid lane tower. Look at this again. Perkz had no reason to be so far up. Does get caught, does get chunked, does survive. I want to take another look at that flash from Wonder, because he should not have been able to escape this, realistically. So, stun lands. Mata already burned alt. Okay, so most of Mata's stuff was on cooldown from hitting Perkz. Okay. So, game continues. There's now a Baron, which means G2 finally goes for the 1-3-1 that SKT has never had an answer to and continues to not have an answer to. And G2 at this point can take it fairly slow. They have the Baron buff, so they get to decide lane assignments. They get to say, okay, this is what's going on. You have to 1-3-1 with us now. They have the gold lead. They have such a significant advantage. They can aggressively push into the jungle and stop SKT from being able to make some sort of aggressive engage play to shut down the 1-3-1. So G2 in this 1-3-1 should be unstoppable. And you know what I said about having the advantage to get the aggressive vision to shut down any SKT attempt to stop the 1-3-1? So Jankos is down here, and they don't have any of that vision in the topside jungle. G2 decides not to do what I just said and take it slow and use your advantage to get a massive jungle vision advantage so that SKT cannot make an aggressive engage play, and decide to instead let SKT make an aggressive engage play. And caps will go down, and the rest of G2 will rotate into that jungle that SKT never had any real right to be in to begin with. Pick a 2v3 fight, which SKT runs away from. SKT, in order to have any real shot, needed to commit to that fight back and try and burst down the bot lane from G2 before the other members of G2 could arrive. But they didn't have enough vision in the jungle because G2 is ahead. And they honestly have such a low goal lead that they aren't necessarily guaranteed to actually win that 2v3 fight. So SKT takes a 2v3 engage defensively, lets the other members of G2 arrive, the other members of G2 arrive, and SKT loses 2 members. That plus the Baron pit is going to be enough to end the game, and G2 takes down SKT. EU better than KR. Who would have thought? All in all, really kind of predictable draft on the side of G2. We knew from the beginning they were going to go for 1-3-1, and then they went for 1-3-1. SKT didn't really do anything to stop it. They said, okay, you can do that. Feel free to have all of the 1-3-1 champs. We are going to pick our favorite champs. We are going to pick Lee Sin, because I love Lee Sin. We don't need Engage on our jungler. We're going to pick Ezreal, because Teddy loves playing Ezreal. We don't need Engage on our AD carry. We don't need the ability to contest bot lane pressure when top lane is already going to be behind. So this game was a lot about G2 picked what is arguably a more linear team composition. G2's comp has to 1-3-1. They have a very set outline of how this composition goes about winning the game. And SKT, for the most part, just kind of let them. They picked themselves into a position where they had disadvantages, a big disadvantage in the top lane, and then did not have a bot lane that was really capable of pushing and getting an advantage to try and take that pressure away, because they went with Ezreal instead of a more aggressive AD carry. So the map just kind of fell apart for the side of SKT, and Faker elected to never leave mid lane, and the other members, the side lanes, fell behind to a degree that a Azir that was up 30 CS, and he was never up 30 CS, Azir was up 10 CS really, was never enough to overcome that. Really interesting game, really, really high level of play from G2. I'm really, really impressed. I'm excited to see how they play and compete versus G2 later on in the event. But great game, really strong from G2, really good to see. I'm John Valentine. Thanks for watching.